So the first thing I'm going to show is the anthropometric measurement for waist to hip ratio, and the way that you find that is so you're going to find your belly button, and then you're going to breathe in and breathe out, and then you're going to measure right above your belly button. I take that measurement, so mine's at 32 inches, and then you're going to repeat the same thing for your hip at the widest part, which comes to 43 inches. So then to find the waist to hip ratio, you're going to take the measurement for your waist and divide it by the measurement for your hip. So mine is 0.74. So an anatomical position is when a person is standing erect with all joints extended, your feet are parallel, and your palms are facing forward with your fingers together like this, and it's commonly used as a reference point for the body. Okay, so now I'm just going to give some examples of directional terms. So superior is when something is closer to the head, like your shoulder is superior to your spine, and then inferior is when something's closer to your feet, so your knee is inferior to your hip. And then so anterior is towards the front of the body, so for example, your heart would be anterior to your spine, and then posterior is towards the rear of your body, so your spine would be posterior to your ribs. And then, so medial is when a position or movement towards the midline of the body, so like moving your arm in towards your midline, and then lateral is position or movement away from the midline of the body, so up like that. And then, so proximal is when the closer of the attachment to the limb of the body, so your shoulder is proximal to your wrist, and then your wrist is distal, which means having a position further from the attachment of the body, so your wrist is distal to your shoulder. Superficial is when it's closer to the surface of the body, so your skin is superficial to your bone, and then deep is when it's further from the surface of your body, so your bone is deep to your skin. So next I'm just going to walk through the cardinal planes of your body. So you have 3 cardinal planes, and they're sagittal, frontal, and transverse. So your sagittal plane divides your body into right and left halves, so it would be kind of going down the middle like this. And then your frontal plane divides between anterior and posterior, so it'd be a divider going like this. And then your transverse plane divides superior from inferior, so it'd be a plane dividing you like this. So next I'm going to talk about your axes, and you have 3. So the first one is your medial-lateral axis, which passes horizontally side to side and is perpendicular to the sagittal plane. So it goes like this, and then the sagittal plane. And then the next one is your anterior-posterior axis, which runs horizontally front to back. So it's going to run through like this, and it's perpendicular to the frontal plane, which goes like that. And then the last one is your superior-inferior axis, which passes up and down, so it's like this, and it's perpendicular to the transverse plane, which goes like that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about your center of mass, which is a point that represents the average location of the system's mass. So all the cardinal planes are going to pass through this point, and the gravitational pull is concentrated here. So the way to find it is it's just below your belly button, and in females it's a little bit lower down than it is in males. Okay, so these next things I'm going to show is motions in the sagittal plane. So the first one is flexion, so this is flexion of the knee, and then extension of the knee, and then hyperextension would be any movement past the normal range of extension, and then there is dorsiflexion of the foot, which is like this, and then plantar flexion, which is down. Okay, so now I'm going to give examples of motions on the frontal plane. So this is abduction is when it's away from the midline, adduction is when it's towards the midline, and then this would be elevation of the scapula, depression of the scapula. And then so deviation, you can ulnarly or radial deviate. So this would be radial deviation is when you're bringing your hand radially towards your radius, or ulnar deviation is when you're bringing it towards your ulna. And then lateral flexion is anything like from your head over to your shoulders, or bending at the waist. And then inversion and eversion is easiest to show with your foot. Okay, so then an example of inversion would be like that, and an example of eversion is like that. And now I'm going to give examples of motions in the transverse plane. So you can either rotate to the left, rotation to the right. You can have internal rotation of the shoulder, which is like that, or external rotation, which goes like that. You have protraction, retraction, and then so pronation of the wrist, and then supination. Okay, so now I'm going to give some examples of motions in multiple planes. And the first one's circumduction, which involves flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction. So one of those is your shoulder can do circumduction. Okay, so next I'm going to show you guys pronation and supination of the ankle. So right now my ankle is in neutral. So then this would be pronation of the ankle when it goes over towards the middle, and then supination of the ankle is like that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about closed and open skills and how to differentiate between them. So an open skill is something that can be affected by the environment, and so your mind is constantly having to think about what it might have to change or adapt than what it's used to. So a good example of this is like a cross-country runner, because when they travel around to a different meet, they're going to be running on different terrain than they're used to. It might be wet, it might be dry, it might be hills, it might be rock, it might be dirt, and so they have to change what they do each and every time they go to a new place, or if the weather is different, or any outlying factors. And then an example of a closed skill is so that's something that's not affected by the environment, and so an example of that would be like a gymnast's balance beam routine, because like the material the beam is made out of is standard, the height of each beam is going to be standard, and the routine that the gymnast is going to be doing is going to be the same across all the different times that they perform that. Okay, so now I'm going to give examples of the different types of movements. So the first one is motion, which is a change in position with respect to spatial and temporal frames of reference, and so that's just like any kind of movement like that. And then the next one would be translation, which is a motion along either the X, Y, or Z axis, where all the points of the system move at the same time in the same direction with respect to the reference frame. So it's like moving your arm like that along the X-axis. And then within translation, you can have two types of translation. So you can have rectilinear translation, where the path of the system is a straight line, so like moving like that. And then you can also have curvilinear translation, where it's a curved line, so kind of going like that. And then the next type of movement would be rotation, which is where it's restricted to move around a fixed axis, so like rotating left to right with your spine, or spinning in a circle. And then you also have general motion, which is a combination of translation and rotation. So like a non-human example would be a car moving down the road because the wheels are spinning on an axis while it's laterally moving. And then I guess it would be like spinning in a circle while also moving laterally. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the three different types of skills. So the first one is a discrete skill, which is a movement with a definite beginning and end point, like a jump. The next one is continuous, so it cycles a motion performed repeatedly, and it doesn't have a well-defined beginning or end, so like walking, really continuous. And then the last one is a serial, so it's a movement that appears to be continuous, but it's really a combination of discrete movements, like an ice skater doing like a jumping combination, or my example was skipping. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the different types of kinetic change. So the first two types are simple and complex. So simple kinetic chain is when it only has one or two linkages max, so it's like your arm or your leg is only linked in one or two places. And then a complex one is when it has more than two linkages, so like your torso is linked to your hip bones, to your scapula, to your arm, and then as well to like your ribs. And then then you have also closed and open kinetic chains. So like an open one is when the most distal segment is free to move, so like during a biceps curl, because the most distal part of your wrist is moving the entire time. And then a closed kinetic chain is when the most distal segment is stationary, like when you're doing a squat, because your feet don't move from the ground.